What do a radical preacher, a classical composer, and a plastic car have in common? They all changed who gets a voice in Zwickau. Hi, I'm Justine, the nerdy half of the Breakaway Bravehearts, and today I'm in Zwickau.
Even when spaces look quiet, they can still speak volumes. They tell a story about who had a say in shaping a city and who these places are really for. Public spaces don't appear by accident. They reflect choices, often hard-won, about how we spend public money and whose voices matter. When we see care being taken in these places, we're also seeing the impact of people who imagined something better, who spoke up and who pushed for change.
And many of those changes were sparked right here in Zwickau.
To understand how far we've come, we need to look back to a time when public space and power looked very different. Starting with the imposing walls of St. Marien's Cathedral. It's hard not to be swept away by St. Marien's. This wasn't just about creating a beautiful space for worship, it was about making a statement. To remind everyone that the church held both spiritual authority and real, tangible wealth.
For most people who lived in cramped wooden homes, stepping into the church must have felt like stepping into another world. But it was still a world that reinforced hierarchy. Nobles could sit at the front, guild members in the side chapels, and peasants could stand at the back.
Have you ever paused to wonder how small cities like Zwickau managed to build something so monumental?
Well, behind the beauty lies a story about power and unfair burdens placed on ordinary people.
Construction on St. Marien began in the early 13th century and continued for well over 100 years. It was a massive, ongoing investment that required money from the entire community. Parishioners paid tithes, a tenth of their income, plus special church taxes, and were often also expected to contribute labour or materials.
But here's the thing, for many people these contributions weren't voluntary. The church had the power to enforce payment. For the wealthy, giving was a matter of prestige or piety. But for most people, giving was an obligation, one that had a major impact on their daily lives.
As the centuries went on, the church's need for money didn't decrease. They started to create new ways of raising money. None more controversial than the selling of indulgences. These were certificates sold by church officials that promised to reduce punishment for sins once you reached the afterlife.
For the faithful, indulgences offered hope. For the church, they were a lucrative source of money. But some started to see it for what it really was: exploitation. The 16th century brought a seismic shift, and a lot of that was caused by someone who is said to have preached right here, Martin Luther. Luther really wasn't happy about how the church was getting its money and how it was making decisions over how to spend that money. And he said so, often and loudly. Luther's message went far beyond theology. He argued that faith should be based in scripture and personal conscience, not in grand displays of wealth. He openly criticised the church's use of public resources and the sale of indulgences. Luther challenged not just church doctrine, but the very idea of who should have power and who should have a voice.
And his voice would echo far beyond St. Marien's. Luther's ideas were the catalyst for the Reformation, a turning point in history when people began to question the authority of the Catholic Church.
The Reformation sparked a debate about how resources were spent and what role the church should have in society. It led to a much broader shift from centralised clerical control to individual power, and later community power. Fast forward to today, and St. Marion's is wrapped in scaffolding. And where this money is coming from is interesting to question too. It's a whole bunch, a whole network of groups. We've got city, state, federal, EU and local heritage groups all providing the funds. What they're building here is kind of small but really significant and symbolic. They're actually creating public toilets, something that would have been unthinkable in the church's history. It's a shift towards more accessibility, more everyday practical uses, away from the sacred to a public domain. Visitors are welcome at the church, but it will cost you €5.
And while you're there, I recommend you just walk across the courtyard to the Priesterhäuser, another example of religious power.
The Priesterhäuser are among the oldest standing clerical residences in Central Europe.
These sturdy houses, built in the 13th century, were home to priests and church staff who shaped the daily life of Zwickau.
The church shaped not only beliefs but also education, festivals, moral codes. Let's take the example of Father Johannes, one of the clergy who would have lived in these houses and had a role in the daily lives of the people of Zwickau.
He lives in one of the Priesterhäuser. His day is filled with more than just spiritual duties. He's a teacher, a mediator, and sometimes even a judge. For townspeople, he's a source of guidance and at times a figure of authority to be wary of, one who can offer charity or withhold it.
But Father Johannes is also caught in the middle. He's supposed to enforce church rules, collect money for the tithes, maintain moral order. But he lives with these people. He sees their daily lives. He understands the ups and downs of crop failures, illnesses, disputes with neighbours. So sometimes he bends the rules, lets a minor transgression pass, because he's starting to understand that such a rigid system doesn't always fit messy lives.
As the Reformation stirs, Father Johannes faces new challenges. Some townspeople begin to question why so much of their hard-earned money goes to Rome. Others look to new ideas about personal faith.
Johannes, who was once seen as an unshakable pillar of authority, now finds himself explaining, negotiating, defending his role as both a representative of the church and a citizen and fellow neighbour. Fast forward to today, and the kind of role that Father Johannes would have taken is now covered by a network of people: teachers, social workers, civil servants. Their work is much more under scrutiny, much more in the public eye. But now that there's more people in the mix, it hasn't reduced the tension any. I worked in the education sector for 25 years and I can relate to what Father Johannes must have been going through. Now you've got to balance your professional integrity with political agenda and the voices of the youth and the parents in your community. The big difference, of course, is that we now get to have individual control over our destinies. So when we feel that tension and we're struggling to make that balance, we can step away. The options are much wider for us today. Today, the Priesterhaus is a very well curated museum which I highly recommend. You can get an audio guide in English, and if you happen to get here and get your timing right, on the first Wednesday of every month, entry is free. And another quick tip for you, if you're enjoying this video and you like learning about history by exploring hidden gems across the world, hit subscribe and the notifications bell. And please leave me a comment. I love hearing from our subscribers. I read every one. Not far from the cathedral is the statue of a man who took up Luther's voice and raised it even louder. He helped explode that question over who holds power into open conflict. In the early 1520s, Zwickau was a city on the edge. The booming silver mines had brought wealth for some, but the gap between rich and poor was growing wider. Into this atmosphere stepped Thomas Müntzer, a fiery preacher who preached here at St. Catherine's.
Social tension was already rising in the city, especially among tradespeople and journeymen, frustrated by restrictive guild hierarchies and growing inequality.
Müntzer quickly took up with these more radical groups. He thought the religious message should be spread with everybody, regardless of wealth or status, and he started organising meetings with the community's more neglected population. His sermons weren't just electrifying, they were polarising. He didn't just challenge church authority, he challenged the whole social order. He argued that the poor and the powerless had equal rights to dignity and justice. While this spoke to the heart of many, it upset the privileged few. Perhaps that's why his tenure here was short-lived. He clashed with Catholic priests and moderate reformers. Even Luther's allies got a bit upset with him.
Riots broke out across the city, and within just a year, Müntzer was fired and forced to leave Zwickau.
But his influence was profound. He helped spark the Peasants' War.
In 1524, tens of thousands of peasants across Germany rose up in protest. At the height of the revolt, Müntzer led a peasant army at the Battle of Frankenhausen. The uprising, however, ended in disaster. Müntzer was captured, tortured and executed.
Today his statue reminds us that while there is hope, there's also risk with challenging the status quo. His passion for equality and justice speaks to that desire we all have for personal freedom, personal voice. But his fate, exile, defeat and ultimately execution, reminds us that it's hard to challenge entrenched authority. But thank goodness there are still many in the world today willing to take on that difficulty. Perhaps sometimes it's in the voices we don't want to hear there's the message that needs to be told. Zwickau, like many cities across the world, still has that question to answer. What are we willing to risk to create the change we need?
While Münster's struggle reminds us of the high stakes of political transformation, not all cries for equality come through revolt. Sometimes they emerge more quietly through culture, art, and imagination.
As we step into the Robert Schumann House, we're not just walking into the home of a famous composer. We're walking into an example of how individual personal creativity can create power and voice for others.
Robert Schumann, born here in 1810, rose to prominence at a time when cultural life was opening up beyond the courts and churches, and artists were starting to shape public opinion and identity in new ways.
Schumann wasn't just all about beautiful music. He was a pioneer in making art accessible to ordinary people. Instead of just composing for the elite, he wrote songs for the growing middle class, and his performances were in public halls, not just private salons. He also created a journal to help young composers challenge the old hierarchies and promote new, fresh ideas. He helped spark the career of people like Johann Brahms, and he thought it was important that everybody had music as part of their education, not just privilege for the wealthy.
But Robert's story is inseparable from that of his wife, Clara Schumann. Clara was a child prodigy, a celebrated concert pianist, and a composer in her own right.
Clara faced enormous challenges as a woman in 19th century music world, but she was determined, and she soon became one of Europe's most acclaimed performers. She was not just Robert's muse, she was a creative partner, and her insistence and encouragement helped Robert compose some of his most famous works. After Robert's mental health declined and he eventually died, Clara took over his legacy. Together, Robert and Clara helped challenge the idea that cultural power was rooted in birth or wealth. Instead, they modelled the idea that you could grow through hard work, courage, and talent. Some call this a democratization of music, the move from music being controlled by just a few to being open to everybody that wanted to participate. Today, Zwickau's commitment to creativity goes far beyond just music, from a thriving theatre scene to investing in striking contemporary sculptures to making space available for legal street art and public murals. These efforts aren't just about beautifying a city. It reflects a belief that public spaces are an open canvas for all voices and should be accessible to everyone. By welcoming both local graffiti artists and international sculptors, Zwickau is using its public spaces to reinforce Schumann's idea that the arts belong in everyone's daily lives.
Creativity here isn't limited to galleries and parks. It's also found in workshops, factories, and the spirit of invention that's driven Zwickau for generations. Our final stop is the August Horch Museum. August Horch was a pioneering engineer and the founder of Audi, whose innovations put Zwickau on the map as a centre of automotive excellence.
But this isn't just a place to admire shiny cars. It's a window into how industry, big ideas and ambitions of both an individual and the state, can reshape an entire city.
He was famously hands-on, often seen in the workshop alongside his engineers, but Horch's career wasn't without controversy. After a dispute with his business partners, he was forced out of his own company. So he went on to found Audi, cleverly naming it with the Latin translation of his own surname. Horch means listen in German, Audi in Latin.
His vision, and later Audi, completely transformed Zwickau, kicking off industrial growth. Now, I can't take my camera inside to show you around the museum, but if I did, you'd see everything from elegant limousines to sporty DKWs. You'd see a time where entrepreneurs and innovators were the movers and shakers of Zwickau. And you'll see a time where the city's fortunes rose and fell, dependent on the next big breakthrough. But it's not just about the cars, it's about the people. Generations of workers powered Zwickau's factories through war, political upheavals, economic change.
Zwickau's industrial roots run deep, but the landscape is changing. Manufacturing, especially cars, still drives the economy, yet many factories are now owned by global companies and key decisions are made elsewhere. Factory jobs are fewer, so young people need to prepare for a more flexible future. So Zwickau stands at a crossroads, holding on to its proud industrial past while navigating a fast-changing, globally connected world. And if there's one symbol that captures both the pride and the paradoxes of Zwickau's industrial story, it's the Trabant. You can't talk about Zwickau without talking about the Trabant. Standing in front of the Trabant Denkmal, you're looking at more than just a quirky little car. You're staring straight into the heart of East Germany's everyday life and the complex legacy of people's power under socialism. The Trabant, or Trabi as it is affectionately known, rolled off the production lines here in Zwickau starting in 1957. It was designed to be the car for everyone.
This was classic socialist thinking. Transport shouldn't be reserved for the wealthy. The state subsidised production, kept prices low, and promised that soon every worker would have one. But the reality was a little different. The Trabi's iconic plastic body, made from recycled materials, its tiny two-stroke engine, and its basic design were all product of a system that had to do a lot with a very little input. The waiting lines lasted years, sometimes decades. It got to the point where when you finally received one, it became a family celebration.
At the same time, the car's limitations, its lack of comfort, slow speed and outdated technology, became a running joke both inside East Germany and out.
But the Trabant is more than just a punchline. For many, it represented freedom. Families went on holidays, newlyweds drove off from their weddings in them, and when the Berlin Wall broke, it was the Trabi that poured through the crack. The Trabant statue is a tribute to the ordinary people who made the best of what they had through ingenuity and determination. But it's also a reminder of the gap between the ideals of equality and the reality on the ground. And that's something we still have to remember today.
Today, the Trabant is remembered with a mix of nostalgia and humour. It's a cult classic, a collector's item. The Trabi's story still resonates. It raises timeless questions. Like the Trabi, today's innovations bring both hope and complexity, sparking debates not just about sustainability, but about access. The real lesson? Progress isn't just about machines. It needs to be about people too. And here in Zwickau, the challenge is making sure that change is fair and no one gets left behind.
When you walk along the Muldenpromenade, you're experiencing a different kind of power from that of church officials and factory owners. The Schwanenteichpark is a huge space, and it's a beautiful mix of family fun, quiet, calm, relaxing green space, and environmental rewilding. Zwickau invests in its green spaces not just for beauty, but to promote health, social connection and environmental care. And decisions about how these spaces are made are increasingly being opened to the public forum.
In a way, these spaces are the most visible evidence of how the power has shifted in Zwickau. They show that influence isn't always about who controls resources or institutions, but about how we design and share the spaces where daily life happens.
And I have really enjoyed my day in Zwickau. And I'm really grateful to the people of the city who have shared their spaces with us.
Next, I'm off to Dresden, where we'll explore how the city has been shaped by collective efforts, from the hands that rebuilt it after the war to the everyday contributions of neighbours who helped make Dresden a place for community.
I hope you'll join me there. Until then, happy travels everyone.